What if the real reason you're still stuck financially isn't your income, your job, or your situation, but a lie you've been believing without even realizing it? A quiet assumption that sits in the background of your life, telling you things will eventually fall into place, that you're somehow on the right track, even when nothing is actually changing. And that's the trap, because the moment you believe progress is happening, you stop questioning it. You stop looking deeper. You stop taking control. Instead, you stay busy, working, earning, spending, mistaking motion for progress. But being busy isn't the same as moving forward. It just feels like it. And that feeling is dangerous because it keeps you comfortable inside a cycle that never really improves your life. You don't panic, you don't act, you just continue, month after month, year after year, telling yourself you'll get serious later. But later never shows up. It quietly turns into more of the same. And the scariest part? This doesn't feel like failure. It feels normal, which means if you don't catch it now, you won't catch it at all. And that's exactly how people stay stuck for decades without ever realizing why. What if the reason you're still not financially stable isn't because you don't know what to do, but because you've been waiting for a moment that was never going to arrive? A moment where life feels ready, where money feels enough, where stress finally disappears on its own. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There is no such moment. And deep down, you already know that. But that's the waiting trap. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like logic. It feels like you're being careful, responsible, even mature. Once things calm down, once I earn a bit more, once I figure things out. But notice something. Those sentences never end. They just evolve. The situation changes, but the excuse structure stays exactly the same. And here's the turn you usually miss. While you're waiting for the right conditions, your life is still being shaped by the wrong habits. Nothing dramatic changes in a single day, which is exactly why it's so dangerous. You don't notice the drift, you just slowly become someone who always delays action, always postpones decisions, always pushes the real change into a future version of yourself. But the worst part isn't even the waiting itself, it's what it turns you into. Someone who no longer trusts their own timing. Someone who needs everything to feel perfect before they move. And by the time you realize it, waiting isn't something you do anymore. It's something you are. And that's the point where you stop losing time and start losing control. What if the thing you call financial security is actually just financial dependency you've never questioned? Because if your income stopped next month, how long would your life actually stay stable, really stable, not just, I'll manage somehow stable? A few weeks? A few months? That question alone exposes something most people avoid thinking about. Because here's what's actually happening. You don't feel in control of money, you feel carried by it, by a salary, by a routine, by a system that repeats itself just often enough to keep you comfortable. And as long as it doesn't break, you assume everything is fine. But that's where the shift happens without you noticing. You stop making decisions based on growth and start making decisions based on survival inside your current setup. Not what builds wealth, but what feels safe right now. Not what expands my future, but what doesn't disturb my present. And slowly, your entire financial thinking shrinks without you realizing it. And here's the part most people never pause on. The same system that makes you feel stable is also the system that defines your limits. Your income becomes your ceiling without ever officially telling you it is one. You don't see it as restriction, you see it as reality. But reality has a way of changing suddenly, because dependence always feels like safety until one day it doesn't. Until an expense hits, a change happens, or uncertainty enters, and you realize something uncomfortable. You weren't actually directing your financial life, you were just reacting inside it. And in that moment, the question stops being theoretical and becomes personal. If everything you rely on paused tomorrow, how much control would you actually have left? Why does your financial situation feel worse the moment you start scrolling on your phone, even if nothing in your real life has changed? One minute you're fine, the next minute you feel behind. Not because your income changed, but because your perception did. And that's the first thing you don't notice. You're not just seeing other people's lives, you're absorbing them as a measurement of your own. A trip becomes a benchmark. A car becomes a timeline. A lifestyle becomes a silent question, why am I not there yet? And without realizing it, your financial behavior starts adjusting to that pressure. At first, it feels harmless. You upgrade a little, you spend a little more, you tell yourself it's motivation or balance or just enjoying life. But it's not really any of those things. It's reaction. Because slowly, your money stops following your plan and starts following your feelings after comparison. And that's where things quietly shift. And here's the moment most people miss entirely. You stop asking what you can afford. You start asking what feels normal compared to everyone else. And normal is always moving. So enough never stays enough for long. Not because your needs changed, but because your reference point did. And once that happens, financial satisfaction becomes something you can never stabilize, only chase. Because there will always be someone earning more, always someone living differently, always someone making your current situation feel slightly behind, even if you're improving in reality. And the uncomfortable truth is this: you don't feel broke because you are broke. You feel broke because your mind is constantly recalculating your life against people who are not living your reality. And over time, that doesn't just change how you spend, it changes how you define enough in the first place. Why does saving money always feel like something you'll start next month, even when you genuinely mean it every single time you think about it? And why does it feel like no matter how much you earn, there's never anything left that actually belongs to your future self? Because the real problem starts earlier than you think. Saving doesn't fail at the end of the month, it fails at the beginning. Not because you consciously choose to ignore it, but because it never gets priority status in your life. Everything else gets it first. The rent gets it first, the food gets it first, the small comforts, the upgrades, the "it's just this once" moments. They all get processed immediately, without hesitation. And by the time you even think about saving, you're not deciding anymore. You're checking what's left after your life has already been funded. And that's where the real pattern becomes visible. Saving isn't part of your system, it's something you try to fit into it. And here's the moment most people never stop to question. If your savings depend on what's left over, then your future is always competing with your present, and your present will always win because it shows up first, louder, and more urgently. So the cycle repeats. You try to save, something comes up, you adjust, you postpone. And without realizing it, saving becomes something you intend to do, not something your system actually supports. But the deeper issue isn't just spending habits, it's that your money is already mentally gone before you even see it, assigned, divided, justified, without your awareness. So when you try to save, you're not fighting your expenses, you're fighting a version of your money that's already been spoken for. And that's why it never feels possible. Not because there's nothing left, but because nothing was ever unclaimed in the first place. Why does it feel like you're always almost going to fix your financial life, but never actually do it? Not because you don't care, but because things are never bad enough to force a real change. There's always just enough money coming in, just enough stability, just enough comfort to push the real decisions into someday. And that's where most people quietly get trapped, not in failure, but in something far more dangerous, a life that is tolerable. Because when life is tolerable, urgency disappears. You don't act, you don't change, you don't rebuild, you just adjust again and again. You recognize patterns, but never breaking them. Every month feels familiar. Every expense feels predictable. Every "I'll be more careful next time" moment feels sincere, but nothing actually shifts. And slowly, that familiarity starts to feel like control, but it's not. And here's the moment that usually hits too late. Nothing is improving because nothing is interrupting it. The same habits are producing the same outcomes, quietly, consistently, without resistance. And because nothing collapses, you assume everything is working. But stability can be misleading, Because sometimes what feels stable is actually just repetition that hasn't broken yet. You don't notice the cost because it's not dramatic. It's not one big failure. It's 1,000 small acceptances, one ignored saving goal, one delayed decision, one comfort purchase that felt harmless, and none of them feel important in isolation until they define your direction. And that's where the real discomfort starts to surface, because if your current pattern was leading somewhere different, you would already feel it, not in theory, in your actual life. So the question stops being about effort and starts becoming about honesty. How long can something stay fine before you admit it isn't changing at all? What if the scariest thing about your financial life isn't that it's failing, but that it feels completely normal? That nothing is going wrong loudly enough to make you stop? No collapse, no emergency, just another month that looks almost identical to the last one. And that's exactly how most people get trapped, without ever feeling trapped, because life doesn't usually send warnings, it just repeats itself. Same income patterns, same spending habits, same promises that next month will be different. And because you're still functioning, you assume you're still progressing. But here's what most people miss. Survival is not progress. Getting by is not movement, and stability without improvement is just repetition that hasn't been questioned yet. You don't notice it at first because nothing feels urgent. There's always just enough money to reset the cycle, enough to cover, enough to continue, enough to delay change one more time. And here's the moment that breaks the illusion. If nothing in your financial behavior has meaningfully changed, then nothing in your outcome has a reason to change either. Time doesn't fix patterns, it strengthens them. But this is where it gets uncomfortable, because the longer the pattern continues, the harder it becomes to recognize it as a choice. It starts feeling like this is just how life is, not because it is, but because it's all you've experienced for long enough. And that's the real danger, not losing control in one moment, but never realizing you already gave it up slowly. So the question isn't whether you're struggling, it's whether you've been repeating the same financial year without even noticing it. What if the thing you've been calling my financial situation is not actually fixed, just repeated? The same patterns, the same timing, the same reactions every month. Different numbers, same behavior. And that's the part most people never question long enough to change. Because nothing about your current income automatically creates your current outcome. Two people can earn the same money and live completely different financial lives, not because one is lucky, but because one decides what happens to that money before emotion gets involved, and the other decides after it's already been spent in their head. And this is where the real shift begins, not when you earn more, but when you stop letting your money enter your life without structure. Right now, most financial decisions are not decisions at all, they're reactions. A bill arrives, a desire hits, a pressure appears, and your money follows. And here's the uncomfortable moment most people avoid fully seeing. You don't actually lack money control, you just don't interrupt your own patterns often enough to notice you've lost it. Because once a pattern repeats long enough, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like personality. I'm just someone who struggles to save. I'm just someone who spends what they earn. But those are not identities, they are unchallenged routines. And the real shift doesn't feel empowering at first, it feels restrictive, because control always feels like limitation before it feels like freedom. That's why most people never stay with it long enough to see what it becomes. But here's the real truth underneath everything. Nothing changes when your income changes. Everything changes when your decisions stop being automatic. And the moment you interrupt that automatic cycle, even once, you're no longer someone reacting to money. You become someone directing it.
Why is it so easy to know what to do with money and still not do it? You already understand saving, spending control, discipline, limits. So why does your behavior still not match your awareness? Because the real issue is not understanding. It's tolerance. Tolerance for small losses. Tolerance for just this once. Tolerance for decisions that feel harmless in the moment, but quietly shape everything long term. And that's where discipline actually breaks. Not in big moments of failure, but in small moments of permission. A decision you justify, a purchase you don't question, a habit you repeat without thinking twice because it doesn't feel significant enough to matter. And over time, that creates something most people never notice directly. A gap between who you think you are financially and how your money actually behaves around you. And here's the interruption most people never stop long enough to feel. You don't fall off track in one moment. You slowly stop correcting yourself. And the longer you stop correcting, the more normal your mistakes start to feel. That's when discipline stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like something you used to be good at. Not because you lost it, but because you stopped interrupting yourself when it mattered. And the uncomfortable truth is this: most people don't struggle with discipline itself. They struggle with allowing.
You're not confused about money anymore. You're just finally seeing the pattern you've been repeating for years. And that's the part most people avoid. Not because they don't understand it, but because understanding it removes the comfort of pretending it will fix itself later. Because once you notice it clearly, you start seeing everything differently. The waiting isn't accidental. The spending isn't random. The delay isn't temporary. It's a loop that has been running quietly in the background while life moves forward around it. And most people don't break that loop, not because they can't, but because they keep expecting a different outcome from the same behavior. Another month, another paycheck, another "this time I'll change" moment that feels real in the moment, but disappears when nothing interrupts the pattern. And here's the moment everything becomes uncomfortable in a different way. Nothing is stopping you from changing, except the fact that nothing is forcing you to. That's the line most people don't sit with long enough, because it removes the illusion that change will eventually happen to you. It won't. Not financially, not emotionally,
Not behaviorally. It only happens when something inside your pattern gets interrupted on purpose. And that interruption doesn't start with a big transformation. It starts with a small refusal. One decision where you don't repeat what you always do. One moment where you don't follow the automatic version of yourself. Because right now, your financial life isn't being actively created. It's being repeatedly confirmed. Every habit is just reinforcing the last one. Every choice is extending the same outcome. And that's why the real shift isn't about motivation. It's about disruption. Not becoming someone new overnight, but refusing to let the old pattern run one more time without question. And in that moment, something very simple but very real happens. You stop being someone who is trying to change, and you become someone who no longer continues what doesn't work.